We pick up in part 4 with our final look at immigration and the waves of immigration in the United States, picking up here with the Johnson-Reed Act of 1924. The Johnson-Reed Act instituted what are called quotas or official limits on immigrants coming into the United States. The graphic on the top right of your screen looks at a reaction to the flood of immigrants coming into the country during the new wave of immigration. And you'll see that the funnel goes down to 3%. Sentiment during this time through our immigration regimes was that we should limit our current immigration to 3% of the previous total. So that would be a 97% drop, thinking that our economy is stabilized, the demand for labor has minimized, and again, that idea that was previously applied to the Chinese as far as coolies goes, that the economic need for immigrants is no longer as important right now in the 1924. So the politicians that worked on this act got creative, and they said that if we look at the flood of immigrants coming from Southern and Eastern Europe in 1924, and we limit that to 3%, that's still a pretty big number of people coming in. What we need to do is go back in time a little bit, and we need our quota to reflect a current era. So they went back to 1890, when very few Southern and Eastern European immigrants actually lived in the United States. In 1890, there was just a small fraction of Italians and Russians and Slavic populations here in the U.S. So by arbitrarily setting that date and lowering the quota down to 2% from the proposed 3%, we saw a drastic curtailment in immigration. We saw the numbers fall off almost immediately, as the areas with the biggest push factors, Southern and Eastern Europe, were now basically eliminated from sending people or sending people and then having them permitted into the United States. So this 2% quota created that pinching, that curtailment of immigration as we moved into the mid-1900s. And then remember, the 1924 policy was a major shift that curtailed it. And then we hit the economic decline, the stock market crash, the Great Depression. So between policy and economics, we all but ended immigration during this period. That puts us into not a wave of immigration, but rather a period of internal migration, which became known as the Great Migration. The Great Migration was a time when 6 million African Americans moved from the South and Southeastern states within the U.S. into the industrial cities in the different sites of production and manufacturing. So rather than having people come from other countries, again, immigration, crossing international borders, we had this mass movement of internal migrants. And the reason they did so was because while the economy crashed in the 1930s and immigration was curtailed and all but cut off, as we hit the 1940s in particular, we started to have an economic recovery. And as the economy recovered, there was a rapid need for labor. And now we couldn't look overseas. The push factors in those countries that had the labor supply, those countries with the labor supply were cut off by the 1924 Act. So we looked internally. In the South, there was a labor surplus because mechanization had taken hold. In the former plantations that relied on initially slavery and then other types of low-cost paid labor afterwards, they were beginning to mechanize, and it was creating a surplus. There was a match in the North in the industrial cities. So that pull factor shifted 6 million people from the South and Southeast into these industrial cities, transforming our urban communities, creating vibrant African-American urban enclaves, urban neighborhoods, urban economies. So again, this was a major shift as far as people goes. And then when we look at polyculturalism, right, we have a group of people coming from the rural Southeast integrating into our northern cities, which were inhabited primarily by, at this point, first and second and third generation European Americans. So there was a cultural shift that took place as well. The Great Migration again, spanned decades. So beginning in the teens, we started to see a little bit of migration coming from the southeast because of that surplus labor. But then by the 40s, we saw really this mass movement, particularly in the war industry and then heavy manufacturing following World War II. So this brought us up to about 1970. So the late 1960s, early 1970s, we saw the end of the Great Migration, where African Americans that had moved out of the rural South had established communities in our industrial cities. So the next look then will be at wave 4 of U.S. immigration, what's known as the ethnic kaleidoscope. And we'll take a look at where people are coming from today. Originating in the 1960s, we'll see how this current wave of immigration has fundamentally transformed, again, the U.S. Cultural landscape.